This is an interjectory response type video to a video that that Imendham posted on, that was a response type video to a video Hythloday posted that was the same Hythloday video that I just commented on my last video. So I'm going to make some comments on Imendham's video. Now, Imendham doesn't know me at all. I only have a few videos on YouTube, and I've got maybe 3 subscribers. So, I mean, with all good reason, he might be saying, hey, who are you, and why should I care about what you say? And I don't really have any good response to that. But it is Imendham, and I think that he's probably used to random people commenting on things he says on YouTube by now. Maybe not, but it certainly seems to happen quite a bit. Now, these two guys are talking about the Hythloday and Imendham are talking about the is-ought problem here, more or less. And I want to make some comments mostly on about the ways people get to their conclusions and the way they have these conversations, more than about the conclusions themselves. I want to talk about models and rationality and reasoning and this kind of stuff. Maybe people find it interesting, maybe not. It's hard to say. But let's get started.
Singular person in a universe has no issues of what he ought to do. He does as he wishes.
So does as he wishes is somehow, that means it's still ethical or it's still right.
I don't think Hythloday said that. He said they do as he wishes. He didn't necessarily imply ethical behavior in it, but I can see how you might read that into it. But I still think you're making some assumptions there that may not be valid.
Obviously, somebody who's stupid can do as they wish, and they're not doing something constructive or productive. And it would be rational to judge what they're doing to be inefficient or nonsensical. So if the one individual happened to be a little bit retarded, and what they did all...
Okay, so there was that word rational, and I have to talk about this a little bit. People use this word in different ways, and it's kind of a pet peeve with me. I want to talk about the traditional usage of the word rational, and it's very different than the popular usage of the word rational. This it gets conflated with reason quite a bit, like what Imendham just said about, is there a rational way of deciding whether this guy's ethical or whatever he's talking about. So I want to talk about this. It's nobody's fault that this is conflated. This is very conflated to a ridiculous point. So in the dictionary, if you look up rational, it'll say reasonable, just like people are using it. It's like, there must be a rational explanation. But if you look in the back of econ textbooks and philosophy textbooks, we're going to get a completely different definition that isn't even mentioned in the dictionary. So in one traditional glossary by Manku, it says rationality is systematically and purposefully doing the best one can to achieve their objectives, which is, I think, completely different than reasonable. It's just self-interest. It doesn't have anything to do with reason. Here's another one from Andrew Schroeder's book. Rationality is the assumption that agents behave according to what they like, that is, their preferences, exhibit completeness, reflexivity, and transitivity. I guess I'll maybe talk about this more when we get to agents. The only point I'm trying to make here is, at this point, is that the traditional usage of rational is different than the popular usage of the word rational. And certainly when we're talking about game theory, we're talking about the traditional usage of the word rational. And that's going to come up a lot in these videos, to where people are going to use rational as reasonable, meaning in context where it shouldn't be that way.
They was rammed their head into a brick wall.
And again, that's nobody's fault. It's a huge problem, and it's a big pet peeve of mine that it's become so conflated, even in the dictionary.
And cause bloody suffering on the, to themselves. It could still be declared that this person has violated rationality or sensibility, has committed a crime against their own sentience, in that they have harassed their body with their stupid psychology. So again, they still could be convicted of a crime per se, of torturing themselves, because they're too stupid to do better. So then it gets in this whole philosophy, this whole Kantian thing, is based on this premise that all we want is selfish things. Like we both want the same potato, and now we're going to come up with some strategy to come up with a fair way of deciding who gets potato or how much potato we get. And that's not what people battle over ethics. Ethics are about...
So I want to refute that claim. It's not really a big deal, but it seems that there's a lot of inequality in this country, that a very small percentage of people own a large percentage of the wealth, and people equate that to an ethical problem. They think there's something wrong with that. So I want to disagree that the division of a potato can't be an ethical topic of conversation.
Not only what we personally want, but what we ideologically understand to be good and bad. And certainly, sensible people would also include the future in those calculations. As much as I hate human beings and have absolute contempt for them, I know that most human beings, if I offer them $50 to roll barrels of dioxin into the Great Lakes, they'll say, no, thank you, I really don't want that on my conscience. They'll realize that the crime against the future is too great for their personal gain. And
So they're saying, I don't want that on my conscience, because having that on my conscience would, keep me from sleeping at night. I wouldn't feel good about myself. Therefore, the desire to have a clean conscience is a selfish motivation.
gain nothing from rejecting the $50. There's no personal interest. They'll just know that, yes, that's just going to cause a whole bunch of unnecessary harm that I'm smart enough to figure out that would be bad.
Given the presence of another conscious reasoning being.
Okay, so, one of my points here is Imendham said all this kind of stuff, and now Hythloday is just getting into the part of adding a second agent or being or whatever you want to call it into the model. He hasn't even brought up Kantian ethics yet. And so Imendham is kind of bashing the Kantian ethics before it's even really been brought up.
There is and that is with agency, yeah, the supposed agent.
Well, again, this whole notion of agency is just, what the fuck? It's a meaningless piece of term.
Okay, so terms have the meanings that we give them through agreement, through usage. Agents are sometimes people and sometimes just mathematical representations of people. It's usually just a mathematical representation of people. So a utility function is an agent. It's just, if you say utility that someone gets from potatoes, is equal to some function of the quantity of potatoes they have. That's an agent. It might not necessarily represent a real person. It's just a mathematical way of simplifying things. One way to think about agents is the ghosts in the Pac-Man game. Now they're going to gain utility by eating Pac-Man, but they can't just eat Pac-Man directly. They have to go some direction in order to get there. So they can go left, right, up, or down, and depending on the location of Pac-Man and his velocity and direction, some choices will be better than others. So their utility from going right is dependent on where Pac-Man is. Now, the ghosts in the Pac-Man game are not people, they're just agents. But people can also be agents because they act in their own self-interest as well, often. Not all the time, but quite often they do. So people can be agents, but usually we're referring to some mathematical representation of what a person might do. Models are ways of describing reality. So when I talk, reality doesn't come out my mouth, just a description of reality comes out my mouth. Now that description might not be very good. It might not comport to reality very well at all. It might comport to some part of reality, or it might be universal truth. But it's not reality itself. Models are just simplifications we use to try and get at fundaments of the problems that we're trying to address. It's a model of reality is not reality itself. It operates under assumptions.
Terminology. What, desire? So, I mean, you gotta go all the way down to insects, and you could probably find some of that. This agency thing. So this doesn't mean anything. What, you have ambitions, desires, needs, wants. This agency word means nothing. It's just not a reasonable or practical philosophical word. You have special agency. What does that mean? If there's a human being who has the intelligence, the actual intelligence of a mouse, that is, he's very good at doing mazes, and he can learn things, and he can lick your feet, and he can do all kinds of funny little things, but he's an idiot. Does he have agency? Does he have a set of desires and wants some cheese and likes to get petted behind his ears? I mean, come on. This is silly.
There is the issue of
the issue is competence, and that's all there is.
So I thought it was going to say there's an issue. Now I don't know what I thought he was going to say next. And Imendham jumps in and says the issue is competence. I don't know. It seems like he's just not listening, right? He doesn't take time to let the sentence finish. So he's going to say the issue is something else before the proposition's even been made. It's just so strange to me.
There's no other issue. So he's going to go into a lot of analogies here. We're going to use Star Trek analogies. Like should the Vulcans have twice as much votes or something if they were going to be voting? I'd say of course they should, because they've earned it, right? They can out-calculate you, they out-knowledge base you, they have more information, they understand more about any subject there is, they know more about it than any of you toads. So if they're going to come up with a strategy to win the game, who's more likely to win the game? Well, the fact is Spock as the quarterback. Yeah, he's more likely to be the guy who's going to win the game for you. So yeah, he's more likely to have more votes for a quarterback. I just, it's just logical that if we had a truly rational society that respected reason and respected logic and respected knowledge, that we would reward people who possess these things and say, yes, you will be rewarded with more authority and more responsibility because you're more intelligent. And it would be more responsible.
The Spock thing comes in much later in this video. Again, I still don't know what Hythloday is talking about here. It's not the Spock thing, because the Spock thing comes in way much later. Hythloday said the issue is, I don't know.
In my opinion, and more accountability. It's not like they're going to profit from the experience, but they should be. They should have a louder voice than some idiot who's chewed gum his whole life and, hopped over cracks on sidewalks.
infringement, impingement of activities upon each other.
So the issue is infringing on other people's. That's the topic of the is-ought gop that we're discussing. The is does other people exist? How ought we ought to treat them? That's the issue here.
Again, this whole conversation just really doesn't have much to do with most of the stuff discussed in an ethical context. Greenhouse gases, all this stuff involves, many generations perhaps into the future. This stuff isn't personal interest stuff. This stuff is practical, what's in the best interest of the entire game. Again, the game is the game. He wants to turn it into some sort of, what do the individuals do to play this game to their advantage? There is no playing to your advantage. All there is in the end is the game. We have to, I'll make the argument, it's fundamentally irrational for you not to think of yourself as a member of a colony, like an ant, and that it's your job to do what's ever in the best interest of the most ants possible, because all the ants are essentially the same. We're all paper bag ants. We're all pawns. We're all indistinct in every important aspect, and in the aspect of how we feel. I mean, clearly you can treat somebody who's comatose different than you treat the conscious, but I'm just saying we can generally say that although our intelligence is not equal, generally speaking, our capacity to be hurt is fundamentally the same. And that and even if it isn't, it's practically impossible to make distinctions about who's more sensitive or less sensitive, and therefore more equipped or less equipped to endure a particular unpleasantness. That's just unpractical. So even if it's not the same, it's impractical to try to make distinctions. So they're all black pawns. And it's just ludicrous to have a conversation about ethics, playing the game to win, and have a conversation about how the pawns should be looking at each other and trying to figure out how to have advantage over each other. If you're doing something besides playing for the team, you're an idiot. You're going to likely be unproductive in your existence. If you take the $50 to dump the dioxin in the Great Lakes, you're not a good guy. You're a failure, a colossal failure at living. Period. You've ethically failed.
So it is an issue how to behave in respect of others.
Well, again, it's hardly an issue in the sense of talking about manners. It's not really talking about ethics. So
did Hythloday talk about manners? I mean, it just blows my mind.
it's like a subclass of the conversation, and it's a subclass in a little paperback book. It's just really not the substance or any meaning to any converse. It's almost an indignity to the word ethics to talk about manners.
The way I see it, the existence of reason in humans creates
and this is the part where the computer gets screwed up, so it's going to take some more time. I'm already 20 minutes in this video, but it gets fixed pretty quickly.
Figures out what's going on.
Not a big deal.
There.
I just,
Oh, gee, it starts working when he doesn't say anything.
and so is game theory a fact. It's
Okay, so he's saying again, like, this is some sort of game we personally win. I could
no, he just said game theory. He didn't say this is a game. He's just talking about game theory. Game theory is a model of reality. It's not reality itself. It's just a model, and it might apply to some games apply to some parts of reality. Some games don't really apply to reality very much at all. none of them are universal, as far as I know. It's just specific instances. We'll get into it.
Win by conquering somebody. I could personally win by raping a woman. I could personally win by owning a slave. That this is somehow, we don't have to account.
Raping women and owning slave. There's no game theory games I know of that are about either of those things.
Account for the harm I caused the other sentient being. It's some sort of competition between me and the other sentient beings, which, in my opinion, doesn't recognize value at all. Doesn't account for the substance of value on Earth, which is not your own, and is just ludicrous.
A mathematically, logically true mode of reasoning.
Well, it's again, it's not practical in any real world circumstance. It's not.
He didn't say it was practical. He said it was mathematically valid.
Game theory isn't going to do you any good on a lifeboat, okay, where you have 10 days of food and you have to, for two people and 20 days for one person, and the prospect of land is 15 days away. How's game theory going to help you there? It's not going to help you any. There's some times where the compromise will fail. And so, yes, the only way to go is for the best man to win. And if the best man knows he's the best man, he has to take decisive action and wipe out the less best man. He has to kill the compromise that will destroy the doing it right. This is like a...
So this is game theory. This one's called The Prisoner's Dilemma, and it's a box with numbers on it. It really has nothing to do with people killing other people. Now, you could apply this model to a real situation where people are killing each other, and that might be valid, that might be invalid, but this model is just numbers on a grid.
Recipe. If some guy knows how to make it right, why would you let people spit in the cake batter? Why would you let any idiot show up and throw any kind of fish in your cake batter? It's just going to dilute the right. So, and the test for right or wrong is going to be some sort of intellectual argument where you're going to have to compile evidence and put them on two sides and say, this is the evidence for this theory, this is the evidence for this theory, and make the argument. But I'm just saying that's where the argument is. The argument's going to have to be on this higher level about the actual value. You can't come up with some silly probabilistic game theory that's going to solve the problem of deciding who's right and who's wrong, because compromise is not winning.
About
Again, this has nothing to do with right and wrong. This one's The Prisoner's Dilemma. It's the most famous of the games. God, how do I do this? That sucks too. So this. Okay. The basic idea of the scenario is that two people are in prison. They're separated so they can't talk to each other and make out an agreement. And the cops are trying to get each one to rat the other one out. So if they don't rat the other one out, it's called cooperative behavior. If they do rat the other person out, it's called defective behavior. So Agent A can cooperate or defect, and Agent B can cooperate or defect. And the payout matrix is a number of points that they get for depending on what each one does. Now we're going to find what's called a Nash equilibrium. And in order to find the Nash equilibrium, both players have to be what we're going to consider rational. Is they're going to try and go for the biggest number, but not just the biggest number on the paper, but the biggest number given the fact that the other person is also going after the biggest number. I'm jumping ahead a little bit because I'm getting bored. let's say we'll start here where they both cooperate. It's not a bad thing because they'll each get 3 points for if they both cooperate. But they both want the biggest number. A, for instance, can go up or down. He's playing rows, so he can do top row or bottom row. B is doing the columns. But if we're here, right, and considering what A could do, well, 5 is a bigger number than 3. So A would rather be here than here. So he's going to get, if they were here, he would change and go here to get 5 points. Now, if they were here, B can go in the columns. Well, look, he's getting 0 here. He can get 1 here. He's going to go to 1, 1. And once we're here, well, if A wants to switch, A can choose to go, by columns. He can go here, he'll get 0. He doesn't want to do that. B, do they want to switch? Well, if he goes to the next row, he'll get 0. So this is the Nash equilibrium for the prisoner's dilemma. Now, this model doesn't actually relate to real prisoners. Real prisoners typically don't rat each other out. They stay true to their set. But this is a good model. It does apply to reality in terms of an overfished pond. Without some agreement, people will overfish the pond to try and get the fish out before the other guy gets the fish out, and then there won't be any more fish, and they went to a bad Nash equilibrium. All right. There's going to be more.
How outcomes are likely to transpire.
Right, but you don't seem to think outcomes matter, because the only outcome you're saying matters is your outcome.
When did he say that?
You're turning this into an individual competition. You're not.
The whole
judging
point
the
of this conversation is we're trying to see what we ought to do about other people.
Outcome based on the
so where are you getting the idea that Hythloday is saying
this concept
only my
giving it fair justice when you're completely ignoring it in every important respect, and then just saying that somehow this is what you're going to get. You're going to get the right result by having some individual competition. Well, you're not.
There's a great guy, I'm sure if you search game theory on YouTube, does lots of great...
It's William Spaniel. Hythloday turned me on these videos about a year ago when he was showing some game shows that used game theory ideas in them. It's a pretty good channel. I don't think so. Instead of
what's really
like checking out the channel,
really the objective shouldn't be
and trying to figure out what game theory is.
What is the most
and then it just
efficient
responds
solution to the problem? No, the game should be me against you. I'm sorry, it just doesn't. To me, that's not the definition of ethics. You already committed an ethical crime when you haven't recognized that the goal is to score the goal. All right? You can only do that as a team. Well, then you know that that's the role you got to play. That's your obligation.
Understanding the payoffs in various scenarios.
Well, there's no payoff using game theory against the Vulcan. I'm just saying that if the Vulcan loses, you lost.
The payoffs are detailed in the chart. The numbers, the points, are the payoffs in the game theory. They're just numbers.
Because the Vulcan's probably right.
Talking about Nash equilibriums, I think, I don't know if this is a general statement, but it's certainly generally true in one respect, but I can't recall it. But like, there's always a Nash equilibrium, at least one.
No, there isn't always a Nash equilibrium. We're going to do another game called Matching Pennies. This game has no Nash equilibrium. Now, Agent A is going to win if the coins match. Like each player brings out a penny. and they're going to decide if I'm going to show my penny heads up or heads tails, and they put it down with their hand over so the guy can't see, and they lift their hands up. If the coins match, then agent A wins. If the coins don't match, then agent B wins. So basically it's like a bet, like they bet $1. So if they both pick heads, then they match. So agent A is going to get $1 and agent A is going to lose $1. If A picks tails and B picks heads, then A loses $1 and B gains $1, and so on. You can see the matrix. Now what happens? Okay, so is this a Nash equilibrium? Well, it's pretty good for player A, but B can go here. He can choose this or this. He'll go here. Well, A doesn't like that one. He can choose this or this, so he'll move down here. Well, B doesn't like that. He can choose this or this, so he'll go here. A doesn't like that. He'd rather go here. So this does not have a Nash equilibrium. It's what's called a repeller point, where it just goes around and around and around. Also, because I don't know how long I'm going to stay with this video, not both players want the same thing in the matching pennies game. I'll just refute a comment Imendham's going to say. Is that in this, A wants a match, B wants no match. So game theory does not imply that both players want the same thing. It just implies that both players want what's best for themselves, and that the other player understands that.
Sometimes a bit more. Sometimes you kind of want to get to these Nash equilibriums, but there are difficulties, let's say, and you recognise that unfortunately you're never really going to be able to reach the true wanted Nash equilibrium, and so on and so forth.
Okay, stop. So, look, you said wanted Nash equilibrium. Nash equilibrium is not wanted, right? Here in the prisoner's dilemma, Nash equilibrium was the bottom square. They'd all be better off with the 3-3 square. But they're not going to stay there because they try and get this 5 and end up here. Nash equilibrium is not always desirable.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, that was, I just skipped over that part. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that really meant something to you all, right? Yeah, whatever.
Very interesting stuff. I'm not an expert, but I think I've absorbed enough to talk.
You're right. You're not saying things perfectly Hythloday, but you've got some idea of what's going on with the game
again,
theory.
this is just this is theory. This is life theory for the solipsistic lunatic. Yeah, whatever.
And to loosely see the inside. One of the principal underpinnings in the assumption of game theory is that you recognize the other person is equally rational.
Right. Now, does that make any sense to you? That there's any such real-world circumstance where the other...
Again, so equally rational, it means that they're both going to go for the bigger numbers. That's in the prisoner's dilemma, in this context, that's what rational means. It doesn't mean that they have equal reasoning skills or anything like that.
The person is equally rational? Has it ever occurred to you to walk up to somebody and say, gee, this guy's equally rational to me? I mean,
I'm not making the claim that they are equally rational. They might have more greed, more self-interest than I do.
Impressed.
But
and yeah, that's
not the point.
The flavor it comes in. They don't come in, oh yeah, that guy's just equally rational. No.
It's an assumption that he has it also. It's kind of an assumption that Imendham has.
Yeah, well, whatever. See, this is the bizarre part, right? He thinks there's equal rationality, but he doesn't think there's equal sentience. He won't concede that, yes, for all mammalian brains, nail in eye sucks. He won't say that statement, but he'll say, oh yeah, all humans are equally rational.
I would gets, understands and buys, this. And I say, in this singular assumption of game theory, where you assume the other person is also reasoning, able to reason, and therefore able to conceive of the game theoretic implications.
So again, this would require the persons to have the same ambition, right? You'd have to be they'd have to be chasing the same potato you're chasing, to be playing the game just like you're going to play it. They'd have to want the same exact thing.
Yeah, no. So again, in the matching pennies game, they want different things, and you can make payoff matrices have all kinds of different scenarios. Where people can, you can have one where everybody gets 10 points here, and everybody gets 0 points here, and everybody gets 0 points here, and everybody gets 0 points here, and this is the obvious choice. You can make all kinds of games where people have, there's one called Battle of the Sexes that's really fun, where player A wants this one, player B wants this one, no one wins on these ones, and they kind of, there's no even propeller point there. They just kind of fight, and I think that's there's no way of resolving that game with the Battle of the Sexes. I should have made that game too, I guess. And I think that's where Hythloday's philosophy of this, we're all going to reason at a table, is going to fall apart because of games like Battle of the Sexes, where there's not going to be a winner to that game. There's no way of resolving, I want this one, you want this one, and there's no, 10 points for me, 0 points for you everywhere else, and 10 points for me, 0 points for the other guy everywhere else. There's just no way to resolve that game. Anyways, we're almost at 40 minutes, so I'm going to stop the video here. I've said most of what I want to say, so thanks for listening.